Drugs make you feel terrific. That's why people take them. Drugs, and I'm talking of course about illegal recreational drugs, make you feel emotions that you otherwise would not feel as easily. For instance, you take cocaine and you're going to feel euphoric, as if you'd won $1 million. Winning $1 million is very difficult. Doing a line of cocaine, very easy. You see? So drugs are shortcuts to certain positive emotions that you want to be feeling. At the same time, certain drugs can make you feel emotions that are unavailable any other way. I'm thinking specifically, in my own experience, synesthesia, which is something that you can often and easily feel when taking LSD or other psychedelic drugs. Now, these emotions, they are fun to experience. And so I think it would be smart to talk about drugs and how to deal with drugs. I'm not advocating drugs. I'm just going to tell you about my own experiences with drugs. I'm talking, as I said, illegal recreational drugs. Some of these drugs are very dangerous. All of them are illegal. In point of fact, if you get caught with them, you can get into serious trouble with the law. So I'm not advocating that you take these drugs. I'm not advocating that you go out and get these drugs and gobble them down and see what happens. I'm only going to tell you what I experienced, what my experience has been with drugs. Now, my own experience goes back to 1981. I smoked my first joint on my 13th birthday back in 1981. And over the next few years, during my teens and my 20s, I was a fairly regular pot smoker. I also did just about every drug under the sun except heroin and crystal meth. And I never did any kind of smokable form of cocaine. We'll get into each of these in turn. But what I want to emphasize first is, see, there are two ways that you can get in trouble with drugs. All right? Trouble not with the law, I mean two ways that drugs can hurt you in a very bad way. Number one is to OD on a drug. What does overdosing mean? It means taking too much of a particular drug or taking a bad combination of different drugs. Such combination or such overconsumption that your body simply can't handle it. It cannot metabolize the drugs, the substances in your body fast enough, and your organs shut down and you die, in the worst case. Now, this has happened lots of times. Guys ODing on one particular drug, or a bad combination of several drugs, or sometimes drugs with alcohol, like what happened with Keith Ledger, for instance. Now, sometimes this is on purpose, sometimes it's accidental. Let's just, for the sake of argument, talk about accidental overdoses. That's one danger. The other danger, and a very serious one, and perhaps in a sense a more pernicious one, is becoming dependent on drugs such that you cannot go through life without the drug. You cannot function normally without drugs, okay? Now, both of these problems, overdosing and chronic consumption of an illegal drug, go back to more or less the same problem: how you consume drugs, why you consume drugs, okay? See, most people, when they are taking a drug for the very first time, they're just curious to experience what it is, what's going to happen to them when they take it. And that was certainly my case. I was just, I would just look at this stuff and I'm like, and I gobbled it up just to see what would happen, all kinds of pills that I'm not even going to get into. And I was just curious. I just want to know, what's going to happen to my body, to my senses if I take these drugs. I remember very clearly when I was 14 years old and I took my first tab of acid, and I'm staring at the tab of acid in the palm of my hand, and I'm wondering, what is it going to be like? Paradoxically, that is the best reason to take a drug, when you're curious to see what effect it's going to have on you. The worst reason to take a drug is to feel better when you're feeling blue. Now, you would think that feeling depressed would be a great reason to take a drug. No. Because what happens is that when you feel blue, when you feel down in the dumps, when you feel depressed, it's usually because you have problems in your life. So you don't want to be taking drugs when you have problems in your life. It's a very simple reason. Because if you take drugs, you're not solving the problems of your life. Your problems are still going to be there. They're still going to be right behind you, like a train bearing down on you. The problem is that, see, you take a drug, and during the time that you're taking the drug, that you're under the influence of the drug, you're basically ignoring the problem. When you finally get out of the drug haze, and confront reality once again, the problem is not only still there, it's closer to you, it's bigger. The locomotive is bearing down on you. And so what happens is that a lot of times when you have problems with your life, you take drugs, you get out of the drug-induced stupor, you find that the problem is the same, if not worse, so you take some more drugs to escape again, and you repeat and repeat again and again, cycling through this circle of trying to avoid the problem by taking drugs, and instead of hiding, it just becomes, it's not a hole in the ground where you hide, it becomes a toilet drain, and you're going down the tubes. You see, that's where you can become a chronic user of a drug. And in my own experience, that's how most of the guys I knew who became drug addicts, that's how it went. They had a serious problem in their life, they used drugs to escape the problem didn't go away, so they started taking more drugs to hide even more from the problem, and the problem just became bigger and bigger until finally the real problem became their drug use. And whatever problems that they had before, money problems, women problems, job problems, school problems, all those problems became minuscule compared to their newfound addiction to the drugs that they've been using to escape their problems. So, never use drugs to escape your problems, to alleviate your problems. Always do drugs recreationally, as a change of pace, not as a solution to your problems, because it's not. The only drug I've ever taken which solved a problem was morphine. I took morphine the one time, and I'll tell you right now, morphine is the most powerful drug I've ever taken, and it is simply fantastic. I'm talking pharmaceutically pure morphine, which I took when I was 21 because I had kidney stones. And if anybody's ever had kidney stones, it's horrible. It is a pain that is indescribable. It was like a gunshot wound to my kidney. It was horrifying. And when they wheeled me into the emergency room, I was screaming and writhing in an agony that I cannot describe. And the doctors knew exactly what it was. The doctor signed off right away. This nurse came with this big injection and just loaded me up with morphine. And I'm saying in maybe 30 seconds, I was under. I felt that effect. I was on the moon. It was the cleanest high I've ever felt. And that's the only time when you can use drugs to ameliorate a problem. And that problem, of course, is physical pain. I cannot think of any other time when you would use any kind of drug, especially a recreational drug, to ameliorate a problem you might have. Okay? So you just have to be very clear as to why you're taking the drug. The next problem is who you're taking the drug with. All right? If you're taking illegal drugs, illegal recreational drugs, you have multiple problems. If you OD, you have to go to the hospital and the police are going to show up and it's going to be a whole hassle. So what you want to be doing is taking drugs, as I did, with people with more experience than you do. Okay? Now there are a finite number of drugs. It's easy to find a guy who's done all kinds of drugs. It's easy to find a friend of a friend, somebody in your social circle who can guide you through the process of taking an illegal drug. Now, never take a drug with a dealer. Always go with a good friend, somebody that you trust, somebody whom you trust to be level-headed. The first time I dropped acid, one of the guys who was going to drop with us, a guy called John, he was a nerdy guy like me. We were all nerds, okay? And we wanted to try them out, just so that we weren't so nerdy, so uncool, terminally unhip as we were. But anyway, John, of course, chickened out, but he stayed. I asked him to, and I'm glad he did. Because nothing happened in that first trip. In point of fact, over the years, I took about I dropped acid 6-8 times, I think. And only once did I have a semi-bad experience. I'll get to it in just a second. But my point is, John was there watching us. We were like a group of 4, 5 guys, 5 including John, I think. And 4 of us dropped acid, and John didn't. But he was there, and he was a guy that we all trusted, and we knew that he would do the right thing if anything happened. Nothing happened. Because 9 times out of 10, 95 times out of 100, nothing is going to happen to you when you take illegal drugs, especially in moderate doses. Okay, whatever drug that may be. Okay, cocaine, acid, pot. You know, pot is one of the drugs that can't really hurt you. Okay, but anyway, my point is, John was there, and we felt confident. We felt confident that he had good judgment. Of course, we didn't articulate it in this way, but I mean, retrospectively, we were all thinking more or less the same thing. If something bad happens, John will know what to do, because he was a smart guy, and he wasn't going to panic. He had chickened out of taking the acid. Eventually, he did take acid with us, drop acid rather. But that first trip, he didn't, but he was there. He watched us the whole time, and nothing much happened. But it's good to have a friend who's there to sort of like guide you or babysit you the first time you do any kind of drug, especially a harder drug like a psychedelic drug. Now, you never want to do drugs with your drug dealer. And this is a lesson that you should learn and just, you know, brand it on the inside of your skull. Your dealer is not your friend. Most, if not all, drug dealers are scumbags. They are charming scumbags. They are just delightful guys you just enjoy hanging out with. Of course they're going to be charming and fun to hang out with, see, because they are dealing drugs. They are salespeople. And they are selling something that is illegal, sometimes highly illegal. I mean, guy who's selling you cocaine, guy who's selling you all kinds of pills, you know, who's selling you speed, who's selling you prescription drugs or whatever, you know, the guy is not a nice guy, okay? You never want to trust a drug dealer. A drug dealer, he's going to be your friend. He's going to toss you product your way, sometimes on the cheap, sometimes like a little bonus. Why? Because he wants to get you hooked as his client. See? He doesn't give a shit about you, except insofar as the money that you will pay him for the drugs that he is supplying. He wants to get you hooked. He doesn't want you to be a casual user. He wants you to be a heavy user. He wants you to be one of his workhorses, one of his, you know, he wants to milk you like a cow, milk you of all your money, okay? Now, that's why you have to be very careful with any drug dealer. If you're a woman, a drug dealer is going to throw product your way, free product, or he's going to charge you real cheap for top-of-the-line product. Do you know why? Because he wants to fuck you. He doesn't give a shit about you. He is using drugs in order to buy you, in order to get you hooked enough that he will fuck you, yeah? And you will let him, unless you are aware of what the guy is doing. By the way, there are lots of gay drug dealers who do this to straight guys. This is something that people don't seem to talk about it very much, but I've seen it. I've seen it in New York, I've seen it in Miami, I've seen it in LA, I've seen it in Boston. Drug dealers who are gay or bisexual and who often try to position a guy that they're hot after, position him to become dependent on them for drugs, and then use those drugs to fuck him. And they prefer straight guys. And it sounds kind of insane. It sounds like something like some, you know, like conservative Christian would come up with, some sort of weird conspiracy theory, but this is the stereotype. I've seen it enough times that, you know, when something is seen so often that it's almost a stereotype, then, you know, you're onto something. It's a valid inference. You can't just discount it because it's not politically correct. So there are a lot of drug dealers who are gay, who are trying to get guys hooked on it and who prefer straight guys. The straight dealers, they want to hook girls in order to fuck them, you know, and some of them use drugs to turn them out into prostitution, that kind of thing. So you just want to stay away from drug dealers because they are all scumbags. All of them, no exception, okay? Now, the different drugs that you want to take. See, the simple approach, and it's a valid approach, is if it grows, it's probably safe. If it's a powder, you got to keep your eyes wide open, okay? Now see, drugs that grow in the ground, I'm talking pot, I'm talking mushrooms, psilocybin, I'd include in that sort of, you know, any of these psychedelic drugs that are used in like Mexican, you know, shaman crap, you know, like Carlos Castaneda shit. You know, all these drugs, you know, they're natural, okay? You can OD on them. You know, you have to be careful, especially psilocybin and mushrooms. Mushrooms, yeah, you can get into trouble if you don't know which mushrooms to take and how to properly process them. Don't fool around. Don't read it off the internet. You want to take your cue from somebody who has real on-the-ground experience, you know. Back when the Dead were touring, you know, it was easy to find these guys. Now they're a little bit harder to find, but you can ask around, and friends of friends usually know one of these guys. They're usually hippies, nice people, you know. A lot of them, especially the ones who are all into the whole spiritual side of it, they'll help you out, they'll connect you in a good way, and they'll take care of you, okay? Now, insofar as other kinds of drugs, like heroin, like crystal meth, like cocaine, my thinking is as follows. Never do anything that you have to inject. Never do any powder that you have to smoke, okay? Now, insofar as cocaine is concerned, moderation. Cocaine is a terrific drug, very powerful. If you use it moderately and wisely, it can be really eye-opening. It can really, you know, because you feel the sense of euphoria. And after you come off a cocaine high, the self-confidence, not the euphoria, but the self-confidence and surety that you feel when you're on coke, it sort of like remains, like an afterglow, okay? So I don't have a problem with coke, but always go with a very simple aphorism. One line of coke is too many, and two is not enough. And that's all you need to know about cocaine. See, cocaine is it's very easy to get hooked on cocaine if you don't pay attention. If you are smart, if you pay attention to what you're doing and you self-discipline yourself, cocaine can be a very interesting drug that can give you a lot of benefits. The drug that I think is the most beneficial is LSD. Both from my own personal experience and from what I have seen personally of people who took LSD and the effects it had on them. I can speak, I'll tell you a story, and this is a true story. This is something about somebody that I know really well. Back when I was a teenager, when I was just starting out with drugs, I was very close friends with a guy called Mike. Mike was this lanky, skinny guy, blonde hair, like white blonde hair almost. Guitar player, smart guy. He was really like very pretty, you know, it was almost like a girl, like his face. And he was an alcoholic. I mean, he had serious home problems. His parents had split up and there was like fighting all the time. This guy was a serious alcoholic. He was, I took the bus in the morning with him often, and he was drunk at 8 in the morning. Vodka, that was his sauce, that was his poison. And I mean, I would say he was well off, and he was an alcoholic. I would say he was putting away a bottle of vodka every 2 days, something like that. I mean, weekends more. I mean, and I saw him. I mean, sometimes I was, I helped him out puking in the bathroom. The guy was a serious alcoholic. He was one of the guys who dropped acid with me the first time. And this is the thing that I will never forget. The guy stopped being an alcoholic the second he dropped acid. I have no idea how that happened, okay? But I started noticing it, and it's something that I've noticed in other people. Now, I'll talk about Mike specifically because that's an experience I knew firsthand because we were friends, we played D&D together, and a whole bunch of other shit. We liked the same music. He turned me on to Rush when I was a kid. So, Mike, I'm saying he was drunk 5 days out of 7 during the week. And sometimes just really, really wasted. Always on vodka, and so the teachers were never actually sure if he was drunk or just weird. And he was taking a lot of pills, a lot of pot, a lot of stuff to numb the pain, as it were. He dropped acid with me, and that guy John I mentioned, he dropped acid. And I remember a party that we were at this girl's place called Marta, and he wasn't drinking. And I asked him, how come you're not drinking? And he said, he gave me an answer that blew my fucking mind. He said, I forgot. What the fuck? I've noticed how people who have taken psychedelic drugs come out of their trip or trips, radically different. Like they somehow get straightened out. And it's really weird, and I always wondered about it for the longest time until, as a grown man, I started realizing the reality of Big Pharma. And why is it that there have been no serious, large-scale studies of the use of psychedelic drugs? And why is it that you have these weirdos like Timothy Leary and other people who would go on and on about the benefits of LSD and mushrooms and psilocybin and all the other psychedelic drugs? Why would they go on and on and on about them, but nobody would do like serious studies? And then it became really clear. See, the pharma companies probably have done studies on psychedelic drugs. And it seems very clear to me from experience, and don't just take my word for it, ask people, you know, deadheaders. They always know that kind of shit. How many people who had serious psychiatric problems and they dropped acid and it seemed to straighten them out, you know? Sometimes after just a single dose, sometimes like a course of 2, 3, 4 doses over, say, a 4, 5, 6 month period. And the serious psychiatric problems that they might be having were like almost magically straightened out. And they were like normal. I suspect that Big Pharma pays off politicians to keep LSD and other psychedelic drugs illegal so that there is no cure for certain psychiatric conditions, so that these psychiatric conditions continue indefinitely and so therefore have to be treated with psychotropic drugs like Prozac and lithium and all the rest of it. You see, if somebody is cured, they're not going to spend any more money on their disease because they're cured. But if they have a psychiatric condition which is chronic, they have to keep on buying the drug every day from the big drug companies, you see? And who does this remind you of? Well, it reminds you of drug dealers, of that skeevy, douchey drug dealer who's selling you weed, who's selling you coke, who's selling you acid or pills or whatever, who, you know, wants you hooked on their product, you know? You see, the same thing with big pharma companies. They want you hooked on their product. They don't want to cure you. They want your condition to be chronic. Because if you're cured, you're no longer a customer. Just like with you know, drug dealers. If you are a casual user, you know, a once a month kind of guy, they're not going to be able to milk you out of your money. See? So that's why I think that a lot of psychedelic drugs are not tested, are not studied systematically. In point of fact, it's been illegal to study LSD for decades. I think recently they lifted the ban. I don't know, I don't keep on top of the news on this. But for decades plural, 30 years, 40 years, it was illegal to study these drugs to see what effects that they would have. Who do you think was putting pressure on the politicians? The drug companies. Because they don't want these psychiatric problems to be solved. They only want the symptoms to be ameliorated, okay? Because it's good for the bottom line if these psychiatric conditions remain chronic problems. Okay, now, finally, about drugs in general, don't do them, is what I would say. But, of course, people are curious because people are people. And so, you who are listening to me are probably going to do drugs. Do them carefully. It's better to take less than too much. Okay? You're doing drugs, you want to be taking a moderate dose. If you're dosing yourself and you're thinking this is too much or this is too little, go for it too little. Always better, always less. The other thing, don't get impatient with the effects of a drug. If you take a drug and after 15 minutes you don't feel that anything's happened, don't worry about it. Wait another 15 minutes and another 15 minutes. One time I dropped acid and it was kind of old. It took about 45 minutes to kick in. It kicked in though. It kicked in hard, okay? You gotta be careful. Don't fuck around with drugs, okay? If you feel that you took a drug and you're getting no effect whatsoever after an hour, maybe 2 hours, you don't take another one. You don't take another pill. You just assume a bad batch. You assume maybe something happened that your body was able to assimilate it, whatever it is, but you don't chase it with another drug. You don't chase it with alcohol. If you don't feel the effects of a drug for whatever reason, assume that it has been absorbed by your system and your system is processing it, and maybe you are not feeling the effects, but your body is. So don't chase it with booze, don't chase it with more of the same drug. Okay, you can wind up in the hospital, you can get into serious trouble. If you get a dud, if you think that even if you think that it was a placebo and it was just, a sugar pill that you swallowed, don't force it, because it could be that simply your body does not react to that first pill even though it was a real thing, but the second pill could kill you. I'm talking pill or the second line of Coke or whatever. Don't chase it. Once is enough, and if it doesn't kick in, just forget about it and just write it off. But be very careful, because that's when you can accidentally have an OD. Because you took the pill, you did the line, you did whatever it was, and you get no effect, and you're like, fuck this shit, it's a dud, and then you gobble up some more, and that second time adds on to the first, and you're fucked, okay? I mean, you can get into serious trouble. I'm not talking about trouble with the law, I'm talking about trouble with your body. It can get fucked, okay? Drugs are nothing to mess with. You will find, though, that 9 times out of 10, nothing's going to happen to you. Okay? 9 times out of 10, 19 times out of 20. But it's that 20th time that can get you in trouble. So be cautious. Be careful. Be careful who you do it with. Be careful when you do it. See, for instance, when you decide that you're going to take a particular drug and you've never taken it before, of course you're going to know more or less what the effects are going to be. So prepare yourself for those effects. For instance, if you're going to do LSD, you always want to do it in a safe place, and you always want to do it, absurd as this may sound, on the ground floor of a building. Hopefully that building does not have either a basement or a second story. Okay? I took it in ideal conditions. I took it in a out-of-the-way suburban ranch house in a very quiet street. No basement, no second floor. Because what happened was, like, the third time I dropped acid, I thought I could fly. Not kidding around. And I was really convinced I could fly. Now, of course, I couldn't fly. But if I'd been on, say, the 5th story of a building, I could have gotten into my head that I could fly, and I might have wound up jumping out the window. Now, at the time, I had this notion that I could fly, even though there was a part of my brain that was still rational saying, you cannot fly. And sort of like, almost like a joke with myself. But it was a little scary, because that urge to try to fly was very, very strong, okay? So you gotta be careful with this stuff, okay? It's like a power tool, See, a power tool, like a bandsaw or something like that, it's a very useful tool. It can do a lot of good, actually. But it's nothing to fool around with. It's nothing to play around with. It's potentially very dangerous. You can wind up cutting off a limb. Same with recreational drugs. They can give you a lot of benefits. They can make you feel emotions that are very intense and very interesting. They can expand your world and your horizons. They can expand your mind. I honestly believe that LSD is one of the best things that ever happened to me. And look at me now. I'm a middle-aged man, and I'm perfectly fine. And I dosed myself when I was a teenager, and I'm perfectly fine. I don't twitch or anything like that, or at least I don't think I twitch. But you have to be careful, okay? Okay. Don't be dumb. Don't be stupid. And don't get greedy for the emotion, for the high. Let it happen. Let it come to you. Don't go chasing after it. Yeah. I think that this is all I want to say about this issue. It's a complicated issue. Okay, best of luck.